Welcome to Born on the Bayou Sports, a Houston sports show made for Houstonians by Houstonians. Join Tim Costello and Scott Barzilla every week as they break down the latest in Houston Astros, Rockets, and Texans news. Tim's a former minor league broadcaster, and Scott has written 2 books on the Baseball Hall of Fame. Yeah, if Javier could get it figured out, it would make things a lot easier because he was that guy everybody was counting on this year to be a Cy Young candidate, take that big step forward and help anchor this rotation with Fromber.
Since he's come to Houston, you can look at the development of guys like Carlos Correa defensively, Jeremy Pena defensively. I mean, you can Alex Bregman's, certainly I think a better than average third baseman.
And now you're putting teams in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9. Now here comes Will Anderson. Pin back your ears, let's go. So if you're Bayou born and bred, or just like spending time in the H, sit down, relax, and stay Houston strong. Welcome all my friends to the show that ends in about an hour, hour and a half. Scott, how are we doing this week?
Doing good. And how about your first place Houston Astros?
Life is good at the top, Scott. Life is good at the top. And, after the way this season started, it's just nice to savor the fact that, at this point in the season, the boys have fought the way they have and put themselves in position. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the show because I think we've got a lot of Astros talk, a lot of Rockets talk, and some good Texans training camp stuff coming at you here today.
Well, and maybe just a teensy little bit of golf.
A little bit of golf. There was a little major across the pond, as they say, where a certain American won his 2nd major of the year and was pretty ballsy bogey free in the final round. So we'll talk a little golf, but first, Scott, how was the week? What was the week that was? You're on summer break. I know you've had just relaxation station over there in Houston. What's the week that was for you?
Well, it's not bad, but the summer vacation is pretty much officially over. I return to work tomorrow. I get a day off on Friday, but then I go back again on Monday, and then I go back for good on Thursday next week. So not a whole lot of the vacation left.
Yeah, I think you soaked up a good amount of relaxation. I feel like you had a good trip, made some memories, mixed it up with some people with different views, stuck in a car for hours on end, saw minor league stadiums, saw major league stadiums. I feel like you had a pretty good little summer vacation.
Yeah, I can't complain. First world problems, Tim.
Hey. I went to a wedding this weekend, and I was introduced to just the most wonderful little town, Scott, in Texas. It was called Salado, Texas. I don't know how many people live there. Can't be many. And it was just delightful. I mean, played a little golf in the morning, just a good old-fashioned country wedding, brisket for the first night, fajitas for the second. Just gives you that small-town Texas vibe that, like, you only see in a movie when, like, there's a football team that you need to tell a story about. But it was nice to get out of the big city lights, as they say, and head south down 35 and just see a little slice of hill country paradise, I should say.
Nothing beats small towns. Have you ever been to Mexia?
I haven't. No, I honestly I feel like I haven't visited enough small Texas towns after this trip here.
Well, the best thing, we drove through Mexia, and this was years ago. And they had a restaurant that, I kid you not, the name of the restaurant was The Other One. And so I got to think there's a story behind this. I can picture you driving in and you talk to some old guy in town and, well, you got this one and you got the other one. But I'm sure you've heard the Aggie story about the 2 Aggies that went to Mexia.
I haven't. No, I've never heard of Mahale.
No, Mexia One of them said, no, it's pronounced Mejia, and the other one said, no, it's Mexia. And so they went into the first place they could find, and one of them said, can you tell us where we are, and can you say it really slowly? So the girl behind the counter said, Dairy Queen. So
every small town's got a Dairy Queen. You
that's
got
right.
that right. You got that right.
Story.
Well, one thing that has been gotten right has been the way the Astros are playing here lately, Scott. First place, we mentioned, one game up on the Mariners. You hate to nitpick, but there is room to do so. So I think I'll give you the floor first, because you mentioned some possible different lineups that the team could be running out there instead of what they have been here lately.
Okay, so let's start out from the general and move to the specific. And let me just ask you a series of questions. When you think of the Astros offense, what are the impediments that come to your mind to them being the best?
Top heavy.
Okay.
Injury riddled. Too many holes. Too many black holes in the lineup. And I'd say 2 strikeout prone towards the bottom of the order.
Yeah, okay. I can go along with those. And the thing is, I think when we text back and forth, I think in the games in which we lose, the expression that gets thrown out more often than not is we left too many ducks on the pond.
I believe the term that I used is we left a village on base tonight.
Yeah.
I quote Harry Doyle.
We left a village on base. So I kind of looked up some numbers, and some numbers kind of back that up and some numbers don't. So currently the Astros offense is 11th in Major League Baseball in runs scored. Do you know where they rank in batting average?
Towards the top. I think they're first still.
They are first in Major Leagues in batting average. What about on base percentage?
Probably number 1.
No, actually, they are 9th in OBP.
Okay.
So I would say the number I like to, I call it, I don't think there's a number for this, but I call it isolated patience, which is the difference between batting average and on base percentage. Ours has got to be one of the lowest in the league, which I'll get to that in a minute. So where in slugging do you think we are?
I'd say top 10.
Yeah, we're 7th. So that puts us in a comfortable 8th place in OPS. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at a team that's, consistently 7th, 8th in OBP and slugging and OPS, you would think we should be 7th or 8th in runs scored, right? I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Now, so here's what shocks me. Okay, our OPS with the bases empty is 712.
Okay.
I'm going to throw out a guess of where it is with runners on base and runners in scoring position.
On base, I'm going to guess like 650. Runners in scoring position, I'm going to guess like 580.
Wow. So men on base, let me look at to make sure I get this. Now, this is not including today's game. 769 with runners on base.
Okay.
762 with runners in scoring position.
No way. There's no way. What fucking games am I watching?
Now, I think there are 2 reasons for that. I think, and then this is, I bore this out. I wrote an article for Crawfish Boxes where I basically said this. The Astros play bully ball. They play bully ball about as well as any team that I've ever seen. Think about today's game. What was the final score, Tim?
8-1.
It was 3-1 for most of the game.
Yeah.
But then we played a little add-on at the end. And so I think you see a lot of games where this team scores 10, 11, 12 runs, and that tends to make your overall numbers kind of look better.
Correct. But also I think you and I would both agree that anytime the Astros score 10, 11, 12 runs, everybody looks at each other and goes, going to get 0-1 tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's what happened in the first 2 games of the series, right? So
this team scores in bunches, though, and they've been that way for 3 years because right now they're top heavy, right? Like you have to rely on Jose Altuve, Jordan, Bregman, and Diaz to have good games. If those four have a good game, it seems like everybody else follows suit. If they don't, we don't have any. There's no Kyle Tucker to carry us right now.
Yeah.
There's no protection for Jordan. There is nobody in the lineup after Jordan that you truly have to be like, ugh, I got to be careful right now. That doesn't exist. And not having Kyle Tucker for what we thought was a bone contusion, 6 weeks maybe. We're looking at like 3 months now. When they say hopefully back before September, like, I mean,
Yeah.
a spotter the other day said there's hurdles he still has to clear as far as fielding and running the bases and other things like that. And it's just like I am curious how much information was withheld, Scott, on this injury.
I heard a good explanation. We were talking some of the crawfish people. We were talking offline. They said when you're talking about a bone contusion, you're really talking about microfractures.
Very true.
And so I think, and in essence, you have a broken leg there. But let me go back to, so when you're setting up a lineup, right? What are some of your priorities just in general of setting up a lineup?
I want some balance, right? As far as, I mean, if I've got lefties and righties, I kind of want to try and maybe split them up a little bit here or there if I can. It's not the end of the world to me. I'm not Dusty Baker if I can't split them right. But theoretically, like if I can split, I will. I'd like to have someone at the 9 hole who is better at getting on base maybe than some of the 7-8 guys because you have Altuve back at the top of the order. I'd like somebody in that 2-hole slot who's a patient hitter who can hit with 2 strikes well because Altuve gets on base and likes to steal. And then ideally or Don Bass third.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think in generalities to start off with. My first generality is you want your better hitters near the top of the order because they're going to get more plate appearances near the top. So that's number one. But number two, when I'm thinking about, you think about pitching, the whole idea of pitching is to keep guys off balance. And so as a hitting lineup, I want my lineup to do the same thing. And so when I see a bunch of hitters that are all the similar style of hitters, the problem is that there are games when you're going to have pitchers that lock those guys down. And the other thing I'm thinking of is when I got guys in RBI slots, I want them to produce, with runners on base. It's very simple. So when I'm looking at this team, and I went up and down and I went OPS just with runners in scoring position, right? So Altuve is your leadoff hitter, 813 with runners in scoring position. Bregman 733. Alvarez 922. Tucker, we'll assume he's in the cleanup spot when he's healthy, 1040. Diaz 747. Pena 708. But then we jump to Myers 815, Singleton 807, Loperfido 864, Dubon 742, and then down at the bottom, McCormick 631 and Cabbage 826. So I'm wondering if that 4th and 5th slot with Tucker out, if they've got the right guys there.
I feel like 4 and 5 has almost been a rotating door depending on who Espada feels like has the hot hand. You mentioned Jake Myers with an 800 plus OPS. We've seen Myers hit 4th at times during this hot stretch. We've seen Pena hit 5th. We've seen Singleton hit 4th. As a guy you mentioned a higher OPS with runners in scoring position. I just think number one, Scott, that guy isn't on the roster. If you're going to bat Bregman second, which it seems like he's intent on doing, there's nobody to bat 4th, right? I think maybe it's time you think about, pardon me, moving Bregman in that cleanup spot. He's got the 730 OPS with runners in scoring position. However, I think you and I would agree he's been better since May 1st, even better since June 1st, and he typically trends to be a second half player. I would maybe think about moving him into that spot. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on possibly having John Singleton hit second. Um,
Yeah.
takes a lot of pitches, walks at a high clip. A guy who's as a left-hander theoretically on a leadoff Altuve double can, worst case scenario, right ground one to the right side and get Altuve to third with less than 2 outs. So I would be, when you talk about ultimate lineups, I'm looking at a guy who walks at a high rate. Yes, he strikes out at a high rate, but that's okay because it stays out of a double play. And then you've got Jordan and Bregman back to back.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is that, and this is what disturbs me about this lineup. With Tucker on the shelf, if we take Tucker out, Singleton has the highest walk rate on your team. He's walking in 11.8% of his plate appearances. Jordan is the only other player on the roster with 10% or higher. Only other guy. And what worries me is that you look at somebody like Bregman, who's historically been very patient. He's at 7.4%. Now, one thing I will say is that if we're looking at those top 6 hitters that had traditionally been there, all of them are striking out at 17% or less. That's pretty good. But when you get into Singleton, you're talking about 26.5. That's worrisome. Myers is over 20. And then, Loperfito's at 34%. Cabbage is at 34%. And McCormick's at 29%. So what I do like about Singleton in that spot, though, he's only grounded into 2 double plays this year. I mean, you're thinking in a lot of games, Altuve is going to be on first base. So I don't want a guy who's going to ground into a double play. Bregman, on the other hand, is grounded to 9. So, maybe that's a move that does make sense just because you're not erasing that base runner, immediately, the first time of the game.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. And, Altuve's not without blame in this situation, right? Yes, he does have pretty good numbers this year. However, I feel like if you look at Altuve's best seasons, he looked for pitches in specific parts of the plate, and that's how he was going to do his damage. He's seeing the fewest pitches per at bat since 2017. He's swinging at first pitch 47.3% of the time right now. Like that is, I guess, worrisome. As part of the problem the Astros have had, I think, for years, is they get a little swing happy early in counts, and all of a sudden you allow a starter to settle in and a guy that the Astros should be beating up on, basically the whole fucking A's pitching staff. They settle in and they get a little confidence because they get some quick innings, they get some quick outs, they get ground balls. Next thing you know, they've gone 6-7 innings and you're into the bullpen. And the good part of the bullpen, not the part of the bullpen you can feast on in the 4th or the 5th. So, that is troubling as well. You mentioned Bregman's walk rate is down. This is a guy that, normally that OB, that on base percentage is so high because he walks at such a high clip. I think part of it is he got pitches to hit early in the year and he just flat out didn't do anything with them. But also there's a good part of it. As you said, his walk percentage is at 7%. That's got to be a career low. I don't know off the top of my hand, but it has to. Yeah. I mean,
well, and you mentioned Altuve swinging at first pitches, but other than 2020, which I really don't count, this is the highest strikeout rate he's ever had.
Yeah.
So
he's chasing he's chasing the Biggio slider at a higher level than he ever has in his entire life, Scott. I mean, that pitch that we all knew it with 2 strikes was coming to Biggio, it's starting to come to Altuve too.
And Dubon is a guy that, is also chasing first pitches a lot. I mean, he's sitting at a 3.4% walk rate. I mean, that's just, to give you an idea, Yanier Diaz is walking more often than Mauricio Dubon.
Yeah, Dubon's never been a high walk guy though. Dubon is up there as a slap hitter.
He's only striking out 11.6 times, but I think the problem with this lineup is that we have too many of those kinds of guys who are free swingers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so if you're not getting the ball's not bouncing your way, if the line drives aren't finding holes, I mean, it's a quick night.
Yeah.
To your point, we've had so many young pitchers who you're just sitting there thinking, hey, you take some pitches, this guy's going to be chased in the fifth inning. Some of these guys are lasting in the seventh or even eighth inning.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it.
We are definitely susceptible to a good ground ball pitcher, a good sinker baller. You just allow those guys to get in rhythm, and once they're in rhythm, good luck, right? Like that's you. At the end of the day, these guys are still major league pitchers. The reason they're not as good is because people get to them before they get into their rhythm. Once you're in their rhythm, it's tough to break that. And so, that's something that the Astros definitely still have issues with. You mentioned a name to me today, a guy who possibly could be a potential answer to some of these woes. Scott, someone who hit 32 home runs last year, received, I think, 2 or 3 MVP votes, has 16 homers this year. Would be 21, I believe, if he played for played in Minute Maid Park as his home park. And I think it's Isaac Paredes.
Yeah.
Isaac, yeah. I remember Jimmy back in the day. But no, Isaac Paredes for Tampa Bay, a guy who's controllable, can play a lot of third base and first base, has played, I think, 50 innings of shortstop in his major league career and some second base. So kind of a Yuli Gurriel type player who maybe hits for a little bit more pop, but he's going to be expensive, especially with 2 years of club control left. And you have to wonder, do the Astros have the bullets in the gun to go get a guy like him?
He's more than that. I think he'll be a free agent after 2026, I think.
That's so this year plus 2 more years.
Yeah, this year plus 2 more years. Well, and here's the thing about him. And so I looked up the same numbers because I'm thinking of a potential fit, right? So if we're going to assume Tucker's back, let's assume that Espada doesn't make any changes. Let's assume that we're going to go Altuve, Bregman, Alvarez, Tucker. You're looking for a fifth hitter, right? So Isaac Paredes, he strikes out a shade under 17% of his at-bats. He walks in 11.6% of his at-bats. He has ground into 12 double plays, so that's kind of a downside. But 129 OPS plus, and here's the one the two that get me: 831 OPS with runners in scoring position, and a 914 OPS when he hits in the fifth slot in the order. So slide him right there in that fifth slot, and you're looking at a third guy because Tucker walks a lot. And so now you've got Jordan, you've got Tucker, you've got Paredes, who are all walking 10% or more of their plate appearances. I mean, that's where we're starting to create base runners. Now, all of a sudden, you start talking about Yainer Diaz and Jeremy Pena hitting 6th and 7th. That doesn't bother me as much because, Diaz has a lot of RBIs, but he has had a ton of RBI opportunities. It seems like every other game he's coming up there with bases loaded.
Yeah. And he'll get a sac fly, right? Bases loaded, nobody out, and he gets a sac fly. Like, hey, I appreciate the one run, but he could have really done some damage there.
I mean, he's done damage on occasion. I think his
but last year, you and I on our previous podcast, when we were comparing his numbers, like his rookie numbers compared to Mike fucking Piazza, right?
Yeah.
And like Pizza Boy, he is not.
No. 747 OPS with runners in scoring position is right around what he's hitting. So I don't think he's been unclutch, but I'm looking for a guy who is clutch in that spot.
Paredes, I mentioned Yuli, right? Like back in the day,
yeah.
Minus his one down year. Yuli did have a down year, but Yuli was a guy who I feel like zoned in when he had an RBI opportunity. Correa was a guy who the bat was just different when he had a runner on third with one out. He was not going to strike out. He was going to find a way to get that. We need that kind of guy, right? Like people hated on Carlos Lee, But at the end of the day, if you could put Carlos Lee on this team right now in the 5th slot and play first base for you, I think everybody would be ecstatic because he didn't strike out a ton. He found a way to drive in runs. He hit for pop. He hit for average. He worked walks. Like, that's the kind of guy that you need. However, I am worried, Scott, because as I sit back and I look through some of the moves that the Astros have made, say from like 2015 on, the ones that have worked out for the team, realistically, the in-season moves have been the ones for arms. I cannot really think of, bats that the Astros went and got that, had success here. Carlos Gomez floundered once he got here. Caratini was terrible offensively once he got here. Mancini was terrible once he got here. Maben was fast, did some nice running, but like it wasn't like he had any great ABs. I really can't think of anybody that we brought over that came in and really filled a hole offensively for us the way we thought they would. We thought Mancini was going to be that guy when we went and got him, and he didn't do that. We thought Caratini was going to be the guy who offensively could have been that, who knows, because he didn't get fucking playing time the way he should have. But
are you thinking of Vasquez?
I'm sorry, yeah, Vasquez. Christian Vasquez, yes, I'm sorry. But Vasquez doesn't get a ton of playing time. Offensively isn't what we thought he was going to be when we traded for him. I do worry. It seems like it's never worked out when the Astros try and go get a bat.
Well, I think part of it you have to consider is what kind of bats are we getting?
Sure.
None of those guys.
Gomez was supposed to be a good.
Yeah, Gomez was the closest to a frontline player, and he had been a frontline player in previous seasons. He hadn't been a frontline player that year. Like, to me, when I think of a fall off, I think more Scott Kazmir, because Scott Kazmir was great in Oakland that year.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden came here and was shit, which you could have predicted by looking at the peripheral numbers. The other guy I mentioned last week in our show, when we played that little game, Ian Happ, 985 OPS with runners in scoring position.
I just don't want another outfielder.
He's a 904 OPS in the 5th spot in the order.
We have a log jam in the outfield.
Well, but the problem is that, so when if you look at OPS plus as a, just a dividing line, right? Dubon, 94. Loperfido, 91. Chaz, 62 coming into the day, did hit a dinger today. And 77 for Cabbage.
What about Myers?
Myers is actually at 103.
So that's my point, right? Like, Myers is going to be your everyday. Like, you get to the dog days of a playoff chase, Myers is starting center field every day. Hopefully Kyle Tucker's back. So then realistically, you've got one spot left for left field, and it should either be Dubon or Loperfido at that point.
Yeah, but none of them are particularly good, is what I'm suggesting.
Loperfido has the tools. I think it's just we keep seeing glimpses of this guy. He doesn't get the run that he should be getting.
No, that's true. That's true. But I'm just saying, like, because with Ian Happ, he's got an OPS plus of 123. I'm not making a deal for a guy with a 100 OPS plus. I think you got plenty of average, but you give me a guy who's 120 or 130. That's an upgrade.
Yeah, it is. And if that's your everyday left fielder, once everybody's healthy, like, okay, that's a pretty strong outfield realistically.
I think the problem is that everybody's looking at first base. And Singleton now, he's gotten up to Singleton's at a 91 OPS plus.
Yeah, he's not bad.
That's not bad. And that's right around what your left fielders right now are producing. So to me, it's kind of potato. Do you want to upgrade first? Do you want to upgrade left field? To me, I look at it as which position is going to come cheaper in terms of prospect talent.
Yeah. And
if it's Ian Happ, sign me up. Because the only problem is your only other first base prospects that you look at in in trading are going to be free agents. You're looking at a Peter Alonso, you're looking at a Vlad Guerrero Jr. I want somebody who gives me and Paredes really intrigues me because of the ability to play third.
Yes.
Because, if Bregman ends up leaving, you don't have to sit there and go, oh, crap, who do we got playing third base? You got your third baseman right there.
Right.
So I like that option. But like you pointed out, with the amount of years of club control left, that's not going to be cheap.
And we ideally would like another starter, right? If we have to prioritize this one way or the other, you've listed a ton of offensive reasons ranking wise this year why we don't need another bat, right? If you can get one, sure, we'd love it and we'd take it. However, the caveat is I want an arm first. I feel like this team needs another arm, ideally a starter and a reliever if you can pull it off from the right team. But I feel like we've stitched together a ridiculously long starting rotation this year, of guys that have no business of being in the major leagues yet. Like Bloss doesn't have any business being here, and it's not because he's not good. Like he's just not ready.
I think
he doesn't know how to pitch. He knows how to throw.
You look at this Oakland series. This Oakland series is a perfect microcosm of that concept. Because who were your first two starters in the series?
Aaron Getty, who didn't pitch bad.
Terribly. 4 runs in 6 innings isn't
all in one inning too. I feel like they all came in one inning on him.
I don't know that Bloss was just god awful, but I think you got two separate issues, right? First issue is how do we get to October? Well, clearly we've got 3 starters we can count on right now. And they're all pitching fairly well. But it's when you get to Aaron Getty and you get to Bloss where you're just like...
Yeah, Aaron Getty's a 50-50 at best, right?
Please.
Like you never know what you're going to get out of him. Bloss, I think right now is like if you get 4 innings of 3-run ball out of Bloss, you take it and you run. And I worry too, are we hurting his development as a future major league starter by doing what we're doing right now? Like I get it. We really don't have an option at the major league level, but this is a 21, 22-year-old who you're counting on possibly in a year or two, right? Like he's shown he's got the stuff at the minor league level to deserve this opportunity. And he's also shown he just needs a little more seasoning on like how to put guys away, how to set pitches up, how to get through an order more than 2 times by showing different pitches in different locations. So that way, when you come back through the 3rd time, you thought fastball 2 times here. Now here's the slider. You're way ahead of it, right? Things of that nature. He just needs to learn how to set guys up better. I wonder, could Yiner possibly do a little bit better job of helping him with that? I don't know. That's something that, as we said, in a previous podcast, we don't know if what's going on with Yiner as far as his pregame preparation. I honestly, positive or negative, I don't know. But with a young pitcher like that and a young catcher, that's a tough combination, right? Like I have to think maybe Machete would have him prepared more mentally. I'm not going to say anything about what he would do behind the plate during the game or offensively, anything like that. And I think he should be brought on this coaching staff immediately now that he's been paid. But I just wonder if having a guy like that, but right now you've got nothing but young catchers. You've got just young catchers out the ass and young pitchers.
I don't know that Caratini's young. I mean, I think
Caratini hasn't been around until recently. He's been out for a month and a half.
No, that's true. But here's what my point was going to be is that you have 2 separate issues. You have getting to October. Clearly, you want just major league average pitching out of that 4th and 5th slot to get you to October. But the problem that you have is once you're in October, there's a rotation of, Hunter Brown, Framber Valdez, Ronel Blanco, and average major league starter really do it for you.
It depends if average major league starter is Justin Verlander or not.
Well, but we don't know if he's coming back. I mean, he has a neck injury, and I don't know if his head is still attached. The way this team handles injuries, we don't know. Luis Garcia had to be shut down, a couple of weeks ago, and we don't know what's happening there. We basically been told that McCullers is not going to start this year. If he comes back at all, it'll be as a reliever. Now, if he can come back as anything resembling the old LMJ, that's a nice reliever to add to your pen. But I just don't. The problem is if you go out and you get those kind of mediocre guys, I think that gets you to October. I just don't know if it's enough to get you through October.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think that's why the rumor has been they're going after a frontline guy. They've been connected to Snell, who has a player option next year. It's an interesting idea, right? Because of the truncated spring training he had, he rushed into the season. Who knows if we could get him turned around? The price probably wouldn't be that high because he has a player option for like 38 million next year that if he doesn't have a good year, he's probably going to opt into. So realistically, he could be a guy that is pitching for his career. Cy Young winner last year. The Astros were connected to him at one point in the offseason. We don't really know if that was true or not. It could be an interesting candidate. A guy like Kevin Gossman from Toronto would be fantastic. I would love to get him. It's just Dana has been quoted as saying it's going to be a frontline guy.
Yeah, my problem with that though, and Snell's an intriguing candidate because I don't think anybody's going to be on his heels. But when you're looking at Gosman, when you're looking at, Crochet in Chicago, how many teams are going to go after that guy? And
I don't know if a ton are going to go after Gosman. I don't know if he's even available, quite frankly, Scott.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if you could probably, if they love Leon, right, and a package built around him, maybe you never know, right? Guy's hitting 300, has pop. Read an article today that said there's just no room for him in the major leagues, which I don't understand because Chaz is not playing great baseball. But right, if this is a guy that major league teams value, maybe there's some package that can be built to go get you that front end guy. I feel like Glopper-Fido probably has to be included in that deal.
Yeah, the Dodgers. The thing is, the Dodgers and the Yankees are going to go after pitching. The Dodgers are swimming in prospects, and they could honestly give a shit how much money is attached to somebody's contract. Tax threshold, whatever. Where we have that second level tax threshold that's going to kind of limit who we may target there, and that kind of tends to point at the big lefty in Chicago, but everybody's going to be in on that guy. So I don't know. I mean, and I've always said this. You can, Baseball America can say these are the top 100 prospects. Baseball Prospectus can say these are the top 100 prospects. MLB.com can say these are the top 100 prospects. We don't know how individual general managers value guys. I mean, Dana Brown's a player development guy. I'm sure he has evaluations on every team's, top, 20 or 30 guys and which ones he thinks are really good. Question is, who among them likes any of our guys? We can't know that.
I'm going to list you some names here. I want you to tell me who of these you think are good baseball players. Jake Rogers, Franklin Perez, Daz Cameron. Anybody there that you like?
I think Rogers could turn into something.
Okay. That was the huge package that the Astros gave up for Justin Verlander. Daz Cameron was a top prospect. Franklin Perez was a top prospect. Jake Rogers was a top prospect. Prospects don't mean shit at the end of the day. Unless that prospect is Jackson fucking Holiday.
Well, see, but here's the thing, though. They valued them highly. And that's kind of my point. In that, when you mention we throw out guys like Pedro Leon's got a lot of swing and miss in his game. So there's going to be some teams that are going to go like, power speed, sign me up. Yeah, give me that guy. And then there's going to be other teams going to be like, man, that guy strikes out a ton. I don't want that guy. You never know. We're not in those rooms. And I agree. We have no idea Pedro Leon's going to be a good Major League Baseball player. Nobody does. but somebody out there has to value him highly.
I mean, prospects are a crap shoot at the end of the day. There are guys that I thought for sure when they got called up would be fantastic baseball players, right? Jared Cozart is one of them. I thought that Matt Dominguez was going to be a Gold Glove level third baseman when he got called up. Doesn't always work out, right? So at the end of the day, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. You want that guy. If you can get a guy that's going to help you win a title this year, that's worth its weight in gold. When you look back on the Justin Verlander trade, you don't win the World Series without Justin Verlander in 2017. You don't make the push that you make. The city doesn't react the way that this team was in a lull when you traded for Justin Verlander. He was electric in every start that he had other than the World Series starts. And even then he pitched well. He just ran into a little bit of trouble. But at the end of the day, that trade won you a World Series. It doesn't matter who any of these prospects are. It doesn't matter if one of them is an all-star right now. It wouldn't affect anything because you won 2 World Series essentially because you got Verlander back. You got to re-sign him again after that. So you got 2 World Series out of that Verlander trade. He's not signing here if he's not traded here first, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the thing with Verlander, though, and this is where the other half of the equation comes in. His ERA in Detroit that year was about 4. And then he came to Houston and he just, absolutely exploded.
Well, we figured out something with his slider. We had a camera that they didn't have.
Right. So that feeds into my next question is who among these average guys out there would be really good with us because we discover something that will turn them around. And I don't know. I mean, I think our scouts know. I think our, decision scientists know. I think our pitching coaches know. But we don't know which guys they have identified as, man, I'd love to get my hands on that guy. I mean, the one that got me, although he got hurt, was Aaron Sanchez. Remember what he did in his, basically his only start? Because they just sat there and said, dude, they're hitting the fuck out of your slider, but they can't touch your curve. Okay, I'll just throw the curveball then. And they didn't touch him. So there's got to be a guy out there that it's just that simple that you get this guy in Houston and we're going to turn this guy from average into really good.
Yeah, I definitely think that is always an option. I do wonder, however, I was a little bit more confident in those moves when you had Strami as the pitching coach, right? I feel like he was. I think one day he should be a Hall of Famer for what he's done, as a pitching coach. That being said, you don't have that guy anymore, so the Reformation projects have kind of flamed out a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. You're perfectly right. But when you're talking about somebody like a Blake Snell, it'd
be perfect if Strom was still here.
That's the kind of guy you're thinking of. This guy, like, well, we see something that he's doing that we can fix, and immediately we get the old Blake Snell.
Yeah, and I think that's a real possibility of a move, especially if you can get San Francisco to cover a little bit of the salary for this year so you stay below the threshold, and then honestly hope he opts out if he pitches well enough, and then you don't have to deal with it next year. Like, that's a win-win for everybody. You might have to give up a little bit of a higher prospect, but if he figures it out, he's fucking Cy Young winner, right?
Yeah,
at the end of the day, that's the risk that you take. In '98, you traded for Randy Johnson because you went all in, and you got Randy fucking Johnson on the guy had less than a 1 ERA in his time here. You ran into Kevin Brown and it didn't work out, but you were willing to roll the dice and go get it. And it seems that every time this team has had the opportunity, at least in Jim Crane's tenure, he's made the move, right? He's gone and got the guys when the back was up against the wall. He's made that move. But speaking of making moves, let's move our way to Texans training camp as the team made a lot of moves in the offseason, whole new defensive look, some new looks on offense, and first, leaked views out of training camp are spicy, Scott.
Well, not only spicy, I was listening to 610 because I was driving back from my workout this morning, and a fight broke out. They said Yeah, they said this is the first fight they can remember in, several years. It was apparently Dalton Schultz and Derek
Well,
Stingley.
it was a little bit more to it, right? So it was Jimmy Ward hit um, Diggs after he had already slid to be down. So then, Diggs gave him a little something, and then Ward shoved Diggs. Then Schultz came in to shove Ward, and then Stingley came in after Schultz, and it was just, it was on.
Well, what was hilarious was listening to Brandon Scott, our buddy, who's been on with us twice. He's describing this in real time. And so he noticed that Schultz got hit from behind after the fight had basically been over. And he's like, well, there's the guy's getting cut.
Right?
Well, if I find out it's Derek Stingley, it's like, maybe not getting cut. Okay. There's your 4 first stringers, all in a fight. So, although
But
Diggs, they said Diggs wasn't really involved in the fighting part.
no, he was just the guy who took the hit, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Scott, I don't necessarily mind that early in camp like this, right? Like as guys are hitting for the first time in months, tempers are flaring. It's okay, right? Like they did get right back to practice after that. And outside of that one incident, there's been some really encouraging things from camp, right? I think Derek Stingley has been the star minus his boxing abilities. He's been He's been a lockdown corner in every word, every way you could imagine. Right. He's been locking guys up left and right. From what I've been seeing, it seems like the defense maybe just a little bit ahead of the offense right now. But with the amount of moving pieces that we have on offense, I think maybe that's to be expected. No Joe Mixon yet, which maybe explains why the team signed Cam Akers 2 days ago.
Yeah, I absolutely. And to get to the Akers one in a minute, I think the defense always is usually ahead of the offense at this point, in the preseason. And especially, I think D'Amico's style is an attacking style defense,
Yeah.
so there's not a whole lot of thinking involved.
See
And
ball,
so,
flow to ball.
yeah, and so you can sign a bunch of guys. You can sign a Daniel Hunter. You can sign a Denico Autry. You can sign a Shire. You can sign all these other guys, but you're just sitting there pointing, hey, that's the guy with the ball, go get him. Whereas the offense has got all these tons of moving parts, new wide receiver in the room. Now, one thing two things I'm encouraged by is number one, it looks like John Mechie has looked much better in the early going. And I don't know how much run he's going to get. He's probably going to be maybe a backup slot kind of guy. But if he could be like a 20, 25 catch guy this year, I mean, if that happens in key moments, that's great. And then you mentioned Cam Akers, but Dameon Pierce has looked really good so far in camp, according to reports. So it's going to be interesting to see what the role is. And I don't know if they're bringing in Akers as more of a Mixon insurance or if they just want a guy who maybe has a little bit more ability to play on third down than maybe Dameon Pierce does. Maybe that's what they're thinking. But I like the thinking because, you can never have too many running backs.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if Mixon is down for an extended period of time, you're not replacing that kind of back with one guy, right? Like he is a true 3 down back. Well, without him, you've got a guy who, as you said, looks good in Pierce, who can run it between the tackles, and then you signed a guy in Akers who a little bit more of a scat kind of back is great out of the backfield, receives it well, can go outside the tackles a little bit more. So in that scenario, you're kind of having to piece your running game together a little bit more, and it makes sense to have some complementary pieces to play with in that scenario. And then also, let's not forget, we talked about early on when they signed Mixon, look at the 49ers offense and the way that they use Christian McCaffrey. Now, do I think Joe Mixon is Christian McCaffrey? No. But Joe Mixon is great with the ball in his hands when you get it to him in space, no matter where it is. There are times that McCaffrey lines up in the slot and Elijah Mitchell lines up in the backfield. Well, if Pierce is looking good, now you can line Pierce up in the backfield. You can line Mixon up in the slot. You can do an end around with him. You can do some shovel passes, some different looks that, man, like Stroud said he had a 5-headed monster, and people maybe said he spoke too soon or whatever, but There's a lot of options on this offense, Scott. And some of the early talk too was the team looked good in the red zone, and that's an issue this team has had, especially under Bill O'Brien, where even Kubiak too. If Arian didn't punch it in or get it to Owen Daniels, we were settling for three. Well, now you've got some red zone guys who can create space. Schultz is very good in the red zone. Stephon Diggs is good in the red zone. Nico's good in the red zone. You drafted the tight end code
Stover.
Cade out of Ohio State. Like, you've got some legitimate guys inside maybe the 10-yard line where things tighten up a little bit more, where you can make some plays and you can do some different things. So some real encouraging signs from the first week of camp. I think the fight is really much ado about nothing.
Oh yeah, and not only you mentioned Schultz and Stover, but Brevin Jordan's look good.
Yeah.
Tegan Catiriano, who I call him unspellable, but he's looked really good in camp. I mean, you're hoping is having depth, because you never know what happens in a 17-game NFL season, and if you listen to the talk, it sounds like they're eventually going to go to 18 games. Having a deeper roster is just going to be so very important in the NFL.
Well, speaking of deeper roster, let's move on to the Houston Rockets, as it seems there's a possibility, at least being floated around, that their roster is so deep right now that they're considering moving on from Jalen Green. First of all, Scott, I'd like to say I don't think that this rumor came from the Houston Rockets. I think this is outside of the organization. However, not necessarily opposed to it, depending on which direction they go.
Yeah, and I think where you're looking at this is that if you're thinking of a big three, that includes, the big guy in the middle, includes Amon Thompson, includes Green. Is that big three good enough?
I don't think so. I think Jalen Green is kind of just that tier below. I don't think he's a max kind of player, right? And I don't want anyone to overreact to Reed Shepard in the summer league, right? Like, yeah, the guy can shoot. We know that. We knew that coming into this. He showed that is legitimate. That doesn't mean that you move on from your second overall draft pick because a guy had a good summer league. However, it does mean that the way that you plan going forward can be changed, right? Like with Amen being a slasher, you need good 3-point shooting around him. And on the wing, you've got Cam Whitmore and you've got Reed and you've got Bari. Where's Jalen Green fitting in minutes wise? Because right now I do see a little bit of a log jam on the wing for minutes.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you mentioned Reed Shepard. I think you mentioned Bari. You mentioned Cam Whitmore. This team has done a really good job of assembling really good role players. And I think, those guys, but Jabari Smith is not a star. I don't think Reed Shepard's a star. I don't think Cam Whitmore, he does star things every now and again, but I don't know that he can play consistently enough to be a star. And then you got to, look at your guys like, Deshaun Tate and Tari Eason. Are they stars? Are they good role players? Jeff Green at this point in his career is, a good role player. So where is that third star? Where would you like to see that third star that could get this team over the top?
I mean, I think it's got to be someone. You got to have another wing, right? I think at the end of the day, everything that you mentioned about Whitmore is a concern, right? Guy's never stayed healthy his entire career. And you're asking him to take a big step forward, right? So I do like the idea of him being a great bench player, right? So then if you're playing Sengun at the 5 and Jabari at the 4, that the next question is Amen your 2 or is he your starting point guard going forward, right? 'Cause I think that changes that too. If Amen's your 2, maybe you look for a scoring point guard, or maybe a more facilitating point guard, a Chris Paul type who can, um, defer to other players a little bit more. If if Amen's your point guard, and then you're playing Reed more at the two, then I want another shooter. I want a guy who's a knockdown jump shooter, a catch and shoot guy who can give you 25 every single night off of jump shooting.
Well, here's my question though. Do you think Eamon Thompson is too small to play the three?
Uh, I don't know because he's so young. Like, is he too small right now? Yeah. In 2 years, I don't know because he's a baby compared to some of these other guys, right? Like, he still has baby fat on him. He hasn't gotten his man muscle all the way in yet. Even
Because
LeBron,
I'm
like, was a
hearing,
skinny little kid when he came in the league.
yeah. Well, I'm hearing. I mean, I'm thinking like size, like height wise,
But
because
you're
when
not done growing until you're 23. So, like, he still could grow.
you could, and I what I'm hearing is that he's playing a lot better in the off season. That his game has grown. I haven't heard much about his shooting growing as much as decision making and things like that. But when you look at the starting five, I mean, to me, Brooks is the obvious guy that sticks out that you can upgrade from.
I
So
think eventually Cam takes that spot, right? Like, if Cam Whitmore shows you what we think he can be, that's his starting spot, and then Dylan Brooks is maybe a guy coming off the bench or a trade piece with a contract that I think after 2 years it's a team option, if I remember correctly on his. Maybe I'm wrong, but either way, I don't think he's a long term solution at the three. I I this is a big year for your Houston Rockets, right? Like, we are expecting leaps forward from a lot of guys. And we got some last year, right? Like, Sengun showed you he can be a guy that you can run an offense through. Bari, I think, took a step forward into being a consistent NBA player, but I still think he could be a 15 and 10 guy if he commits to that, right? Like, if he says I'm going to bang and I'm going to knock down mid range and corner threes, he could be a 15 and 10 guy every single night. I just need to see that from him. We need to see Jalen Green be a consistent 25 a night guy. That needs to be the floor for him. He needs to be able to fill it up 25 a night, playing in a two-man game with Sengun. All things that we need to see this year. And if you move on from Jalen Green, you're obviously not going to see that. But I feel like this team is built in a way that you can move one of these guys, right? Like, you've got so much young talent. If someone else shows you that they're the guy, move on and build around that guy. That's the way this team is. No eggs are put in one basket, right? They haven't extended anybody. They haven't made a commitment to anybody. I don't even think they know who the future star of this team is. They have an inkling, but I still think they want more before they commit to building around any one of these guys.
yeah, the problem I have is that the guys on the trading landscape kind of fit into two buckets. There are the guys and they're in their 20s who you're thinking like, okay, this guy's in their prime. They can last a few years, but are they really good enough? Like the trade rumor I told you off air was a trade package surrounding Jabari Smith and Jeff Green and a first rounder for Julius Randle. Averaged 24 points a game in New York last year, but is he really good enough, to be a true star level player? Then you got the guys who, when I'm thinking of their games, I'm thinking, yeah, sign me up for that. Like, you hear guys like Durant and Jimmy Butler, but those are guys in their 30s. I don't want anybody in their 30s. So I don't know if there's anybody out there that fits that the game fits perfectly and they're still in their prime.
I think one of the things that I respected about Morey was that he always had the team positioned to strike. Right before we acquired Harden, we had a collection of picks and young talent that could easily be moved. So the theory was that anytime if a star became disgruntled where they are, the Rockets would be in position to go get that guy. Well, it turns out, James Harden doesn't get extended. 2 days before the season starts, Daryl Morey makes the move and go gets his guy. That's the kind of scenario where I see the Rockets taking advantage. They haven't, as I said, they haven't committed to any one of these players long term. They've got young talent out the ass. They've got multiple first round picks. If a star becomes disgruntled, they are in position to go get that guy either mid-season or after the year. So that's, I think, what we pay close attention to. Not necessarily the type of player that we want. I think we pay close attention to some of these super teams that have been built. And, let's say the Suns suck again and Devin Booker wants out. You're in position to go get that guy.
Yeah.
There's opportunity galore when guys get disgruntled or teams fall apart, and you have an opportunity to go pick up some talent.
Yeah. Like the one name I keep thinking of, but he's also on the older side, is Damian Lillard.
He's too old at this point.
Yeah, and
Not for
that's
what
the
you have to pay
problem.
to get him.
Well, that's the problem, is that a lot of these guys that, supposedly are available are on that older side. Booker intrigues me. I don't know if his game fits with what we're doing.
I mean, get rid of Jalen Green, and now you have Devin Booker, and you got a guy who gives you 25 a night, though.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So let's move on. We'll do a quick stop over in Scotland as we talk Open Championship Golf. The male championship golfer of the year is America's own Xander Schauffele. Scott, Xander played just an absolutely legendary round on Sunday, bogey-free 67 to go out and get his second major of the year. 65, I'm sorry, 7 under 65 to go out and get his second major of the year. This is the guy who just top 10s galore coming into this year, right? Like was sniffing the opportunity but couldn't capitalize, and has really turned the corner this year. So I'll save my gesture for him a little bit later. However, I'm excited for Xander. I think he's a first class player, first class guy. And I love the Open Championship. Love it.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to go against Scotty Scheffler for Player of the Year, even though he's got one less major with the number of overall wins that he has this year, which is just outrageous. But that was my favorite kind of round to watch. I mean, you got to feel for Justin Rose, because Justin Rose shot a nice 67.
And I love Justin Rose too. Absolutely. Like that guy's been good for what, 15 years?
Well, and he birdied the last 3 holes. I
Yeah.
mean, that's, you can't finish a major any better than that, except if you're Xander Schauffele, who did, finish the major better than that. And he almost nailed that birdie putt. What was it, on 17, or is it 17 and 18? He came really close to nailing those putts where you're just like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? So I love to see people win that way, because I don't want to see people lose majors.
Right.
I want to see people win them.
Right.
And that was definitely a win.
Absolutely. And I think, you and I talked before the round, it's going to come down to ball striking, right? And when you look at the guys that were in and around at the end, it was guys who strike it beautifully. Justin Rose is a phenomenal iron player. Justin Rose is a Masters champion, and just a classy ass guy. Like I've liked Justin Rose's game for a long time. I like Xander. Gold medal champion in the first golf event in the Olympics. Xander Schauffele won gold. So great player. Happy for him for his second major. But let's keep this train moving. Scott, it is time to honor someone that has probably done something pretty stupid.
The poor guy was just there. He's only been on the team for about 3 or 4 days, but I'm just not feeling Lesmus Diaz. Just not feeling it. And I feel like this is a Dusty Baker-esque move to pick him up and immediately put him in at first base, because he was good back in 2022. Well, it ain't 2022 anymore. And so what did he do in his first at bat? Runners second and third, 1 out. Does he make contact, Tim? Nope.
He does not.
And so I don't, if he's truly a 26 guy, because you're looking at Gray Kessinger, who I think his average still this year is 0. I think I'm right there. So if you're sitting there saying, well, Les Mastias has to be better than Kessinger, okay. But why are we putting him in the lineup the very first day he's on the club? I don't. And what's so funny is that was like a Dusty Baker-esque move, because when you looked at that pitcher's numbers, he was getting killed by left-handed hitters. Who was the only lefty in the lineup?
Jordan.
What did Jordan do to him?
Hit for the cycle.
No, I think he hit for the cycle in Seattle.
No, he did that on Monday. He hit for the cycle.
Well, either way, Jordan hit him, but nobody else did. So to me, that would have been a game where I'm looking at, okay, what is this left-handed pitcher actually doing? Okay, I'm going to try Singleton, even though he's a lefty hitter, because lefties seem to hit this guy. But what do I know? I'm just a fan.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a great pick for the horse's ass of the week. I saw the lefty, and I just knew it was going to happen. And the Astros are a team. I mean, every team, I guess, does it too, where you pick up a guy who's been good for you before. But every number that you look at with Aldi since he left this team is not good. He has been a bad baseball player since leaving the Astros. And I would argue he was bad as last year here, especially in the playoffs when he was like 0 for his last 33 or whatever it was. So, again, putting him right in, I'm with you. I don't know what the move was there. And, again, that whole series, I mean, I think the whole Astros offense for the first 2 games deserves the horse's ass award, because you had an opportunity to be 3 games up right now, and you're only 1, playing the worst team in baseball. And and I will give a secondary horse's ass to the owner of the A's, Mr. Fisher, for sending a form letter to all of his employees, letting them know that their employment will be done on October 3rd, as their services will no longer be needed as they move to Sacramento.
Does that include the general manager?
I don't know. I'm assuming it's like the stadium and like game day people, but I'd be intrigued to know, like, if you're like the head of the box office, did you just lose your fucking job?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, that's a good call on that one. That guy's a scumbag, although we're kind of stamping on another segment.
Yeah, I didn't think it was quite at scumbag level, but it definitely was worth mentioning, that's for sure. But let's keep it moving, Scott. Time to tip the cap, as they say.
The current president of the United States. So what did he do? He was presented with arguments over the last, I would say, 3 weeks, including numbers, saying you can't win this thing. Now, whether or not we choose to agree with that point, some people agree, some people disagree. But here's a guy that looked at it and said, like, you know what? This position, our future, is more important than what I want and what I need. So he agreed to step down, effective at the end of his term. So he's not resigning. He's just going to serve out his term as president. Now, should he have run in the first place? That's a whole entirely different conversation that I really don't want to get into. How should the Democratic Party have handled this from the get-go? Also an entirely different, conversation. But, could you imagine any politician being in today's America having the most powerful position in government and saying it's better for the country if I'm not here?
No, it's definitely something to be applauded. And I'm really I'm hoping he goes like balls to the wall to end his term, right? Like, the Supreme Court gave him the ability to do whatever he wants as long as it's an official act. So I'm hoping he just does whatever the fuck he wants for the next 3 months. But no, I do, I tip my cap to President Biden for making that decision, because Um, say what you want about the job, like ego comes into it, right? Like you can say that that's not the case and that's not why you did it, but like you literally have the most important job in the world, and you're, we'll say voluntarily deciding to not run for re-election. So, yeah, that was a decision he had to make, and he made it in a way that many would argue was for the betterment of the country over himself. I applaud that, and I do hope that Kamala just wipes the floor with Donald Trump.
Okay, who do you got, Tim?
I'm going to tip my cap to Xander Schauffele. I know we just talked about him. However, guy had so many near misses, so many opportunities to close the door coming into the season. Just never found a way to get it done on Sunday. Never found a way to be the last man standing at one of these majors, and to do it not only at the PGA Championship, which I think tends to be the forgotten major, but then to do it at the Open Championship in Scotland, Royal Troon, one of the toughest challenges in the game of golf, to be the R&A Championship Golfer of the Year. It's wonderful, and it's well deserved, and I tip my cap to a guy like that who just kept grinding. I think, Scott, a lot of people think, oh, well, if you just keep giving yourself opportunities, it'll happen for you. But, I'll be the first one to tell you, like, that's not always the case, right? Like, I've given myself a lot of opportunities to win golf tournaments. I've never won a single one. I've never won a golf tournament. I just haven't had it fall my way at any point in life. That's just how it is. Some guys have that thing in them and they could learn from those losses. And some guys, it just never falls their way. So I tip my cap to Xander for, finding that next level within himself and becoming a two-time major champion here this year.
Well, and this is what the line that always killed me, because you and I both love Tin Cup, the movie. So if you remember, the last hole, what's the reason that Tin Cup gives for wanting to go for the green and two?
He wants to be remembered. He wants to. First, he wants to break the scoring record. No one ever shot 10 under in a major.
Yeah, he wants to be immortal. And what he never understood is that if you win the fucking U.S. Open, you're immortal.
Right? The irony of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, think about John Daly. At this point, Xander Schauffele, we don't know what he's going to do from here on out, but they have the exact same career up to this point. John Daly, PGA champion. John Daly, British Open champion. John Daly is still playing somewhat quasi-competitive golf, and he hasn't been relevant in, 20 years?
Not only that, he is still being paid as like a brand ambassador for Hooters. And
exactly.
his son is getting paid off of his name, and because he's John Daly's son, because of those two major championships, and because he's did the John Daly shit along the way, right? Like, and he really is a perfect fit for fucking Hooters. But you're right. He is an immortal golfer because he hit a 0 iron at Baltusrol.
Yeah, exactly. And so Xander Schauffele, no matter what he does from here on out, two-time major champion, there aren't many of those.
Nope.
There's a lot of guys that have won one. They've kind of lucked their way into one. Like they were mentioning, I want to see if you remember this. When was the last year that the Americans swept the four majors?
Jeez. What year did Tiger win the Tiger Slam? 2000?
Nope.
Well, I'm going to guess the wraparound of it because he won U.S. Open, British Open, and PGA, and then the Masters the next year.
Right, but technically a foreign-born player won the Masters that year that he won 3.
Okay.
So
maybe like 1990 something?
Nope, got to keep going back.
Okay. When was it? Jack's age?
82. And ironically, Jack didn't win any of them.
You got Fuzzy Zeller in there?
No. Craig Stadler wins the Masters. Tom Watson wins the U.S. Open and the British Open. And I'm trying to remember, Raymond Floyd won the PGA.
That's a good list of golfers right there, man.
That is. That's 1982. So that's 42 years since the last time the U.S. has swept major championships.
Back in the Persimmon and Bellata days. Well, Scott, let's make a move now to the people that have offended us, and they need to be recognized as scumbags of the week.
You're going to have me lead off again?
I am going to have you lead off.
Okay. So I'm going to mention one name, but I'm going to throw in just a whole list of people, underneath that. So my scumbag this week is going to be Brian Kilmeade. Do you know who Brian Kilmeade is?
I don't know.
He is one of the hosts on the Fox morning show. That they were basically the one that Trump would always call into and bug him.
Okay.
And so Brian Kilmeade today was talking about, and he was just hot and bothered that Kamala Harris was not going to sit there and listen to the Israeli prime minister speak before Congress because she had a previous speaking engagement. Now, here's the kicker. Do you want me to quote Brian Kilmeade here, where this speaking engagement was?
Please.
It was at a, quote, colored sorority, unquote.
Fun stuff.
Fun stuff. Kind of throwing in a little bit of racism.
Just a tad. Just a tad. They don't use that word colored very often anymore.
So, but here's the word that I'm gonna throw out. Actually, it's not a word; it's initials. What they are using for Kamala Harris is they are calling her a DEI hire. Do you know what that means?
Yes.
You want to tell our audience what that means?
They're hiring her to fill a quota. It's a race based. It's basically an affirmative action hire.
Yep. So all of her years as a prosecutor, as attorney general in the state of California, as a U.S. senator, and now as vice president. Not qualified. Not qualified because she's a person of color. But yeah. I don't know if she was in a quote unquote colored sorority in her time. I don't know that. But see, here's the thing. And you don't have to fumble over, do I need to call it a black sorority? Do I need to call it an African American sorority? How about just calling it a fucking sorority? Why do we need to, identify it as one thing or the other?
Scott, I was one of only two white guys in my fraternity. It was never called? It was never called a colored fraternity.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the racial makeup was of your fraternity, but I'm guessing maybe mostly Hispanic origin.
Yeah, it was San Antonio. There was only 15 of us active in the fraternity. It was like one black guy, 12 Hispanic guys, and 2 white guys.
Could you imagine somebody calling it, the W word? I don't want to say that on live radio here.
Yeah, no. You wouldn't say that to a lot of these guys' faces. But yeah, that's a good scumbag, Scott. Fox News is fucking insane. Like I can't deal with people who watch that shit. It really is absolutely outrageous. My scumbag this week, I don't necessarily know who to call the scumbag. You can help me decide who the scumbag in this situation is. I voted, unfortunately, Republican for 10 years, as from the time I was 18 to the time I was 28. Never had a single issue. 2018, I voted in the Democratic primary for the first time in my life because I wanted to vote out Ted Cruz, and I like Beto. So I voted for Beto in the primary. It comes time to vote in the general election. All of a sudden, I'm unregistered. Crazy. It happens, whatever. I go through the process. I re-register. I see a meme today about, people being unenrolled. And I was like, well, let me just check. Let me just make sure because it has happened before. And lo and behold, guess who's been removed from the voter registration? Me, again, for a second fucking time in 6 years since I have been voting in Democratic primaries. I've been removed from the voter rolls. When I called in, no one could tell me why. All they said is I had multiple addresses. I said, yeah. I moved, and every time I moved, I updated my address, which is what you're supposed to do, so that way you vote in the proper district. So for all the bullshit that our state's elected officials have made about election fraud, They are actively committing election fraud and committed election fraud on me in an attempt to keep me from voting in the upcoming election. So whoever is the one doing that, fuck you. You're a fucking scumbag.
So here's a funny stat here for you, Tim. In the last 100 years, would you care to guess how many people have been successfully convicted of voter fraud
I mean, it's
in
less
the
than
United
100.
States?
It's less than 100.
Less than 100. So would you like to guess how many ballots have been cast in the last 100 years?
Jesus. Is it crazy to think almost a billion in that
I would
time?
say it's over a billion.
Okay, yeah.
It's over a billion because if you're talking local elections, you're talking statewide elections.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So maybe
maybe
2 or 3
national
billion,
elections.
2 or 3 billion in that
Yeah.
time.
So if I round up to 100, okay, so let's say it's 1 billion votes, right? So I'm getting out my trusty calculator because I want everybody to trust me here. So I'm going to divide 100
It's gonna be
by
like
1
it's gonna
billion.
be like 100th%.
It is 0.0001%.
100th%.
Or 1,000th, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you have a better chance of getting bit by a shark that has the winning lotto ticket and struck by lightning at the same time as you do of finding somebody who's committed voter fraud. And
Unless that somebody is the state of Texas because they're fucking actively doing it right now to Democratic voters.
Technically, it's not voter fraud. That's voter suppression, which is something they're very guilty of.
Yeah, well, it happened to me again for the second time. Luckily, I checked before the election this time. So all of our listeners, I highly recommend you check your voter status as they like to fuck with you.
Yeah, I did. We voted in the mayoral election this last year, so I think we're good.
I voted in the primary.
And I did not vote in the Democratic primary.
But that's my point. I voted in the primary, and since then, they've taken my shit off.
Yeah, I didn't vote in the Democratic primary this time because really, what's the point?
Local.
Yeah, local, but and I do that in order to, I don't know how long they keep they stamp you as, an elephant or donkey. I don't know how long that stays on your record. I'd be interested.
It shows what the last primary you voted in.
So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting point.
Which is why I feel like Democratic primary voters are being targeted and why the state of Texas is my scumbag. I mean, they were very helpful. The local registrar was very helpful in getting me back on. And the moment I used the word voter fraud, oh, no, that's not what's happening. Oh, no.
It's voter suppression, sir.
I mean, I called the state office and I filed a complaint. Like, I don't fuck around. Like, I pay my taxes. I own a home. I have every right to have a say in what the fuck happens here. Like,
that's slander,
I pay my dues.
That's slander, sir. You can't say we're committing fraud. We're committing voter suppression. Get it right.
Yeah, they would have me on that. But I think that's all we have for you here this week. Always a blast. We appreciate everybody who made it a part of their week. Scott, what have you had for us on thoughts of a native Texan and what's going on in crawfish boxes?
So yeah, we're very busy overall looking at the trade deadline. So I've got a few pieces in on that, kind of waiting for them to be published. Obviously, the big thing with the Texans, since we're opening up the season, my favorite features, we have 5 questions where we ask the opponent, one of the beat writers for the opponents, questions about their team. We're actually starting it up in the preseason. So I've actually got the Bears answers all ready for the Hall of Fame game.
Here we go. Here we go. Scott mixing it up with a beat writer for the Bears. Had to bring it in, Scott. I had to bring it in.
Well, so far, I mean, we're going to meet again in week 2. So far it's been friendly. I think when we get around to week 2, maybe not so much.
Is Dicka driving the bus?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
To Bill Brasky, Scott, to Bill Brasky. But that's going to do it for us here this week, minus the outdated SNL references. I think we did a pretty good job. But we will see everybody same time, same channel on Born on the Bayou Sports.